Hi, HR Nation's Chris Rainey. Welcome to HR Leaders, the show where we interview today's most successful and innovative HR practitioners 5 days a week. Today, we're joined by Sam Tam. Sam is the Senior Director of Global HR at Visa. Sam, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on here.
Well, thanks for getting up really early to join us. I'm so surprised that you get up at 5 a.m. every day to hit the gym. I think my business partner would love to be a gym, because he always moans at me to get up in the morning to go to the gym. And I don't get up that early. He's actually in the background now showing me his gun show.
That is funny. Yeah, I don't expect everyone to be as crazy as I am. I'm definitely a unicorn here in San Francisco, because I think one of the few people who actually gets up that early and then comes into work and then works out and all that stuff. So all is fine.
Amazing. Well, look, Sam, tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and your journey to where we are today.
Yeah. So my journey is actually a very interesting one and a very non-traditional, frankly speaking. First of all, let me start off from the personal standpoint. I'm originally from Ghana. I actually moved to Greece when I was 4 or 5 years old. Actually, my parents moved to Greece, and I moved with them, thankfully. So I actually grew up in Europe. I grew up in Greece, and I came to the U.S. for university. Went to a very small school in the U.S. in Ohio. And I actually studied international relations. Having graduated from university, I actually wanted to work in finance. And so my first real job was in finance, was actually at JP Morgan. But that lasted maximum, I want to say, like 5 or 6 months. It was very clear like that was not my deal whatsoever. Sitting behind the computer doing spreadsheets, staying so late, it was just not happening for me. So once I got a taste of the finance world, the investment banking world, realized I didn't want to do that. I actually left and then went into sales, which was very interesting, because again, I didn't really think sales was a career that I really wanted to get into. But I had a pretty successful career in sales, working for a small travel company by the name of EF Education, based out of Boston. So I did that for a few years. And it was interesting, actually, because I tell people that I walked into HR by mistake, by accident. Because what happened was, working in sales for a travel company, 9/11 happened. At that point in time, I had left sales a little bit and I was working back in the accounting world. But when 9/11 happened, they kind of brought all the salespeople back together again. And so I walked back into sales, again, selling travel to Americans to go overseas. The company started doing a little bit better. And so we needed to grow again. And so as part of the growth, they moved some people into the recruiting world. And so they basically tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, Sam, we need you to continue doing your sales thing, just in a different field now. Basically, we need you to go find people and sell them to come work for our company."
Yeah.
Right. And so I started doing university relations. And so that was my first foray into HR, if you will. They started giving me more HRBP responsibilities. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I got into HR. I went and got my master's degree, my MBA. And then I after my MBA, went to Whirlpool. They had a fantastic HR development program there, which I was a part of for about 7 years or so. The program actually lasted only 3 years, but then, after graduating from the program within Whirlpool, kept growing in responsibility, went to Italy for a little bit to lead a team out there and some initiatives out there. And then after Whirlpool, decided to try the Silicon Valley life, because Whirlpool was based out in Michigan, its global headquarters. And so I moved to California, worked for Electronic Arts, which is a gaming company.
Definitely know those. I'm a big fan. Big game.
Excellent. Thanks for keeping EA alive, at least when I was there. And then I came to Visa just about a year and a half ago. So
wow, what a journey.
It's fantastic.
Amazing. What a journey. That's why I love asking that question on the show, because you never know what answer response you're going to get. And that's certainly an interesting one. A few things came up there. First and foremost, what a big cultural shift in terms of moving from Ghana to did you say Greece?
Greece, yeah. So it was Ghana to Greece, then
to the US. How did that affect you? Just briefly, like that is a big culture shift, huge.
Yeah. To be very frank with you, so I'll be very honest. The move from Ghana to Greece, I don't really remember that much, right? So I was really young. Okay. So it doesn't kind of really. I don't really remember that much, but the move from Greece to Worcester, Ohio, was a big one for me. Exactly. Exactly.
I've got loads of friends from Greece, and I've got a lot of people in the US. It's a completely different
Oh
culture.
yeah, no, it's a completely different culture to begin with, right? Greece and the U.S., but
Yeah, of
even
course.
specifically Worcester, Ohio. Right? I mean, Worcester is a small town in the middle of
Oh, so
nowhere
you
in
went straight to the
Ohio.
small town as well. So you didn't even go to the big city straight.
No, 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 not at all. That was the weird part. Because, and by the way, I had never been to the U.S. before, right? So this was my first time going to the
Wow.
U.S., which was moving to university. And keep in mind, I grew up in Athens, Greece,
I
right?
know.
So
It's crazy.
metropolis, crazy, extremely busy, dirty. Like it was
Yeah.
the real deal city life, right? And then, I fly. Again, I'll never forget this. I fly. Back then it was TWA. Flew from Athens to New York. So I landed in New York, and I remember being like, "Oh my gosh, this is
Where am
amazing!
I?
Skyscrapers." I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay, I can handle this." And then my connecting flight was New York to Ohio, and I think that's when I started getting scared.
There's a lot of green fields. You're like, what?
Exactly.
Where's all
I'm
the
like,
city?
where am I?
It's like me when I travel outside London. I get the same feeling. I'm like, where's all the buildings? Where's the traffic? Where's
Yes,
the people? Yeah.
yes,
Wow.
yes, yes.
And then my second question for you was, how did they? Because most of my careers have been in sales, right? And
Okay.
how did they convince you from going from being a sales, because both from an incentive point of view,
Yeah,
obviously you're commission based focused.
exactly.
That's what most salespeople you should be.
Yeah.
Going into a recruitment facing role, how did they incentivize you? What was the story and the why that they kind of gave you to convince that, to motivate you to do that? Just out of interest. This is more of a personal interest question rather than for
Sure.
our audience.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. So it's very interesting actually, because you're right. I was in a commission type based role, right? Working in sales
Yeah.
at EF, but they sold the role in recruiting as, you are significantly helping the company, bringing in amazing talent to help the company grow. Right. So, EF is an amazing company. They
I
treat us
know the
people
company, by the way,
well.
very well. I know the
Oh, you
company.
do?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I know the company. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Yeah, so they're a great company. I mean, to me, they're a case study of how to kind of, create, bringing young talent into their organization, create engagement, right? And really help people grow by moving them around into different roles, right? So they believe in what they call kind of like the spiral career, right? Which is, to grow within EF, you have to do multiple different roles so
I
they
think
can
that's a
kind of
great
grow in the
idea.
organization and learn different aspects of the organization. And the recruiting piece, they sold it because, what they basically said was that, hey, you're going to come help the company in ways that no other person can. And that's by bringing in amazing talent into the organization and helping us grow as a company, which will benefit all of us ultimately. Right? You're going to, get out there, talk to people. They told me that, I was great at that anyhow. It's a different, perspective. They knew that I loved change. And I love trying new things. And so I think they were pretty specific about kind of coming to me and some other individuals to kind of, help them in this aspect.
Yeah. How did they position then? Because my first question would be, as a typical salesman, how are you going to replace all the commission I'm making?
Yeah. So I'll be very frank with you. Like, they did not pay that well. So let's be very, very honest. Right?
Okay. So it wasn't a big.
Yeah.
It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't like my previous roles where 60% of my salary
No,
was made up of commission. Okay. But then,
no. This was more like 20%. This was more like
okay.
20% of
So,
the salary was made a commission. So they were able to make it up from a salary standpoint. They took care of me there. So that was the first thing they did. They said, okay, salary wise, we'll make sure it comes out, relatively equal, right?
Yeah.
Less of a variable pay, let's say, less of a risk. But you take on this really, really cool role.
So in your mind, you're like, wait a minute, I don't have to do the sales now, and I get.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have commissions. Sold.
No, interesting. So what a fascinating journey, because it's such going from. You're the first person I've spoken to that's gone from a sales role into HR. Now I've heard it from finance, I've heard from all different areas of HR, but not many, senior HR leaders coming out of sales.
Yeah.
Just speaking to you for the first few minutes of our call, I can tell used to be sales in a good way. And I also because some of the best salespeople, obviously, recruitment is sales.
Yeah, it is. I mean, let's be very honest.
Features and benefits of the role. Selling the feature and benefits of working in this company.
Absolutely.
So it makes a complete sense that your directors and leaders in the company were like, We need to get Sam out there getting people in. I think that's something that companies don't realize. A lot of them, obviously the recruitment consultancy companies understand that, but internal recruiters within businesses, a lot of them don't.
Agreed.
And similar with, I think it was Jill Katz, who's the one of my co-hosts on our live show. She's the former senior vice president of HR at Macy's. That's how Jill got into the role. She actually was doing like grad recruitment, like getting graduates into the business. And then that's how she fell into HR, because she realized she was really good at doing that in terms of attracting that talent to the organization. And I think that's how she, if I remember correctly, how she came to the business. So very, very interesting. So
honestly speaking, Chris, like I think most companies need to get on this new kind of bandwagon of getting people from the business to come into HR. I think that is a
100%
a win-win situation, right? For both the HR organization, for the business. It's just the business knowledge that comes with people who are transferring into HR from the business. You can't replace. I mean, that's something that is almost impossible to find within the HR world. And it just the level of credibility is just it's just skyrockets for an HR individual who actually knows the business that well. So I feel like that's something that we need to do more of as an HR organization, honestly speaking.
Yeah, it's happening more and more now. And your point earlier, which I love, is I spoke to thousands of HR leaders, and the most successful ones that I speak to are ones that have spent time in different departments in the organizations, in different functions. And they work, 2 years in finance, 2 years in operations, 2 years and then they end up being a CHRO, and they're highly successful because they understand how all of the areas of the business run, and they know how to affect change in all of those areas, right? They've been there and done it. It's not an opinion. It's not the research they've done. They've been there, they've done it. They have, and also they've built the relationships.
Yes.
More importantly, with all of those. So when it comes to these times of change, then they have the buy-in from everyone.
I 100% agree.
Yeah. And what was the other thing that I was going to say? I think, for example, recently I've seen a number of CHRO appointments, and the CHRO have never worked in HR before. So I'll give you a good example. Lego. So Lego has just appointed a new chief HR officer, and I think beforehand he was, I think vice president of products or something along those lines, but nothing to do with HR. And they've straight into chief HR officer role, and he apparently is doing amazing things over at Lego now in Denmark, because he's bringing outside in. Yeah, absolutely.
I think Google has done the same thing, to be very frank with you. Google's CHRO is a lady from the business. I believe she was in sales, actually, now that I think about it. And I'm embarrassed that I do not remember her name right now. But I also want to say that she came from the UK. Don't quote me on that exactly, but I'm pretty sure.
You can't say don't call you on the show.
Yeah, that's on the podcast, right? But I should probably do that research. But yeah, I was very impressed that Google did the exact same thing. So they plucked somebody from the business and brought her into straight up into a CHRO role. I, honestly speaking, it does not get any better than that, right? Because the truth of the matter is, don't forget that the name of our title, right? Like HR business partner, right? Partner. So as a business partner, it is absolutely critical to know and understand the business. In my opinion, that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we have as an HR function these days is truly getting integrated with the business, understanding the business, the perspective, being able to kind of have conversations with our business leaders that are meaningful conversations about the business and not just about talent, right? And so, bringing somebody in from the actual business makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, it's no longer a nice to have, or it's a conversation. When I started, it was like a new thing. It's like that is HR. That's not a part of HR. That is HR. If you're not already doing that, if you don't already have, what was it? One of the things I hate the most, is the HR seat in the boardroom. Like,
oh gosh, that terminology it's first of all, it's so 1980s, right?
It kills me. People still say it though. I still see it online. I'm like, if you don't have a seat in the board, I think Matt Burns, who's the chief HR officer of he said to me, Chris, you know what I did? I took my chair, walked in the boardroom, and sat down. If you're not already involved in the conversation, then you've already failed.
I completely agree.
And the business that doesn't see the value of having HR in that is also So fail. You don't want to work there. You shouldn't
Yeah,
work.
yeah, yeah. You're in the wrong company, right?
You're
Like,
in the wrong company.
we already have a seat at the table. Like, let's
Yeah,
get past
exactly.
that as an HR organization, right? The seat is already there at the table. And by the way, to your point, Chris, if it's not there, then you're in the wrong company. So now it's all about, like, if it is there, or because of the fact that it is at the table now, it's let's step up and let's kind of show up there at that table with our folks, right? With our business leaders.
Yeah, the role of a HR leader should be 100% strategic. I know it can't be right now, and the reality of it is that there is the other side, the administrative side that does exist, but that should be a very small part. All of that should be automated in this day and age, and should be a tiny part of the role of a HR leader. But I think more so in the US, it still highly exists. In Europe, I think we're a bit further ahead. In the US, I think there's still a lot of manual process, and especially when it comes to the legislation and compliance, and that, I think in the culture is still there in the US. Everyone's worried. I think you guys are so worried about being sued. A lot of the time, there's so much focus on that, then rather actually being strategic and working with the business. I think it's a big difference between the leaders I speak to in Europe who don't focus any attention. It never comes up in conversation with me. I speak to people in the US, and it's actually something that's always on the mind and something they're talking about as well. So that's a cultural difference, I suppose, really. So very interesting. And also back to your point about the leaders of the role of HR, I'm seeing many of the HR leaders now becoming CEOs more and more now. When I started this a long time ago, 10 years ago, that wasn't, having a CEO come from within HR was very rare, like if ever.
Extremely rare.
Extremely rare. And now I'm actually seeing it happen more and more now.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And, to be honest with you, I wasn't realizing that there was an upward trend in that, but it makes sense, right? If you have the right, CHRO, or if you have the right, HR leader who, like we were just talking about, has that business background and that business expertise, and potentially has even come from the business, right? It makes sense that after a stint within HR, leading an HR function, where you get a pretty broad view of the business, it makes sense that you would go into a, potentially a CEO role. To do that, however, you need to make sure that you've got the right, business chops, whether it's in finance, marketing, or whatever it may be.
That's the part that needs to
lead an organization.
Mature a bit more, right?
Exactly.
I think we're going to see once more and more now as that matures. I think we're going to see that happen, because you mentioned a good point. Is HR is uniquely positioned in the organization where it has a reach and relationship across every across supply chain, finance, everything. So it's very interesting. So during your journey then in these organizations, can you share perhaps a project that you've been through, that you've managed, or a transformation that stands out in your mind that you're most proud of, or that sort of really made a mark?
So there's a few, frankly speaking.
I'm sure.
But let's go ahead and pick, I'll pick a very recent one, which was with Electronic Arts, that I was the company that I was recently working for before coming to Visa. EA made a very concerted decision and effort to change and completely transform its performance management system, right? And in doing so, part of it was to eliminate the rating process and the rating system, right? And you see that today in Silicon Valley happening more and more, right? More companies are kind of moving towards, eliminating ratings, or the traditional ratings, how at the end of the year, we're rated on a 5-point scale or 4-point scale, whatever it may be, right? So more companies, especially in Silicon Valley, are kind of moving away from that and going more towards a process or system of what we were calling, at least at EA, continuous conversations, right? And so the idea is that, this whole one time at the end of the year process that was so cumbersome, where, people would ultimately get the feedback for how they did for the rest of the year, that should really be happening throughout the year, right? And so, we kind of broke it down into a quarterly process, if you will. First of all, we said this should be happening throughout, right? Again, continuous feedback process. But like official conversations should really be happening on a quarterly basis, and then at the end of the year, nobody should be surprised on quote unquote how their performance is happening, or quote unquote their rating, right? Because honestly speaking, you've been having these conversations throughout the year, and you've been having more formal basis on a quarterly basis, right? And so to me, I was part of the team that was actually driving that change. I was in the communications portion of that work stream, and it was just a fascinating experience to go through, because it's a massive change, right? It's a massive change to go from a system where everyone is so used to, that one time a year feedback and conversation, to making sure that it's done on a yearly basis. And oh, by the way, do not forget that our compensation was tied to that rating.
So that also has to completely change as well.
Exactly. So that has to change as well.
But people don't think about that.
Exactly. Yeah. So the way we approach compensation has to change as well too, right? And so, kind of being part of that transformation, being part of that journey has been, was quite amazing, because the truth of the matter is, first and foremost, we had to convince our leadership team that this was the right way to go.
That's what I was going to ask you. What was the business case that you presented, and how did it finally get what was it that you think finally made him go, you know what, this needs to happen? So what was
Honestly speaking, the business case, frankly speaking, was very easy. Couple of things. People hate it. So if you look at employee engagement surveys, people hated our performance management system, right? So that was the first thing.
And you can literally show that to the board, right?
The data, absolutely.
Doesn't lie.
That was really easy. It's like, take a look at this. People are showing us that they actually hate this process as it stands today. Secondly, if you look at the amount of time that was spent at the end of the year to actually, employees write their self-assessments, managers write their reviews. We sat down and did a calibration. You get the rating. We had to do that regionally, globally. Like,
I remember doing that. It's painful.
Holy cow! It was.
Everyone was like, "Oh."
Yes. It's painful, but
it shouldn't be painful, should it? It should be exciting.
Exactly. It should be an exciting time. Yes. But literally, the HR function was completely out of commission in those 2 or 3 months, right? Because
I spoke to companies, say, "Chris, I can't talk to you right now. We're going for a review."
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And it's quite unfortunate that's the way it happens, right? So that was the other point that we looked at and said, hey, look at how much this process takes. Like, it is insane that it takes this long to kind of do this year-end review, right? So if you couple the engagement survey, we couple informal surveys about this. You talk about the amount of time that it takes. You also, it's also very interesting. We looked at the amount of discrepancies that existed with year-end performance reviews, right? And what I mean by that is the amount of times where managers would come up to HR and say, hey, you know what, we need to eliminate this individual's role, or we need to kind of, manage this individual out because they're not performing and so forth. They've really not been a great performer and so forth. And then we'd say, okay, fantastic. Let's, take a look at the history. Let's build a case. And then you look at the performance rating and they're like exceeds, outstanding or something. And so you're literally looking at the manager and being like, is this a joke? Like, are you kidding me right now? Right? You've been rating this guy, really well over the past few years, and now you want to eliminate him on the basis that over the past few years have not been performing, right? And so you would be surprised how many times that existed, right? And so there was a little bit of a discrepancy there that existed, more often than you would think. And so there was quite a bit of inconsistency, right? And so that was one of the things we talked about. Again, on the engagement survey, most people talked about the fact that they don't get enough feedback, right? And they only got feedback. So not only did they hate the process, but they only got feedback and coaching once a year.
Crazy.
Once a year, right? And so we had to change that. We had to absolutely change that, right? So we had enough evidence, honestly speaking, to kind of convince the leadership team, but it's still something that they're so used to. So letting go of it was pretty difficult. It's
the hard part always, isn't it?
Yeah.
Resistance to change. Everyone knows it needs to happen, but no one likes change.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. So it was pretty fascinating. We did get to the point where we, eventually, changed or convinced leadership that this was the right thing to do. They were on board. CEO was on board. And now it was all about the change management process within the organization, right? Because again, this is something, even though people hated the performance management process, it's still something that we're used to, right? So having to change this, and there were a lot of questions, right, about compensation, about, promotions, about talent management. How does that work now? We don't have a rating anymore. How are you going to compare me to my peer when it's time to get promoted? So there were a ton of questions and a ton of things that we had to make sure that we addressed and included in the change management process.
What do you think was the biggest challenge out of all of that you had to overcome?
Frankly speaking, the biggest challenge was, there were a couple, right? One was what I just talked about, which is how do we make sure that we have the right level of documentation when it came time to things such as, performance exits and or, promotions, right? So how do we make sure that, okay, Chris and Sam are working, as finance managers on this role. We are, ready to, a role opens up as a finance senior manager. Chris and Sam are going for this role. How do we decide who to pick into the role, right? So we need to make sure that there's the right level, people are doing the right level of documentation, the right history, and evidence when making these types of decisions, right? So I think the challenge was, ensuring that managers, even though there's no rating per se, managers are A, having that conversation, but also B, we're having those quarterly, quick documentations to help people understand how they're performing, how they're doing, but also leave a trail of history, a history trail, basically.
Yeah. So how did you overcome that then?
Yeah, it was a lot of education. Frankly speaking, it was a lot of education, a lot of communication. Again, that was a workshop that I was leading as part of this process, helping people understand why it's important that even though we're leaving the yearly process, right, why it is important to continue these coaching and feedback sessions throughout the year, but also have a quick documentation, whether it's like a paragraph, bullet points, couple of things to still go into the employee file to make sure that we're getting the right, the right level of information out to folks. And by the way, right, what we also said is, hey, this should be weekly conversations, ideally, right? The formal ones are quarterly. Yeah. But even in your weekly conversations, even in your monthly conversations, right, it doesn't hurt to have feedback loops in writing, right? So, hey, Chris, you did an amazing job this year or this past week or month doing X, Y, Z. Put that down in an email and send it out to them, right? Or Chris, hey, you really did not do X, Y, Z well, or here are some areas of improvement for you. Let's make sure that we work on this together. Specifically, ABC, send that back out to individuals. So that was a pretty big change management piece where it was just a lot of training that we had to go through.
So I'm assuming the biggest amount of training obviously is with the line managers.
Absolutely.
Of course,
that's where we
right?
focus.
You have to get them on board otherwise.
Yeah.
I think
You'll be surprised actually, Chris, because yes, the line managers for sure, but frankly speaking, we had to we broke down our stakeholders, right, into different categories. Like you said, line managers, execs, business unit leaders, and so forth. Here's another interesting thing that, you would not necessarily think about. And we learned kind of, luckily it was early in the process. One of our biggest stakeholders was the HR organization. Right, we had to make sure that the HR VPs kind of knew, understood the process, knew how to support our leaders, right, and were fully committed to this as well too, right? Because there were a lot of questions on that. About it,
you just assume they're on board, but of course, it's again change to their process, change to
exactly
everything. It's even bigger shift for them.
Absolutely,
than anyone else.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what did it look like then? What did that process look like? Was it, one-on-ones with these guys, group training, was there some technology involved that you used to help? What did the actual execution look like? Because everyone's great at coming out with these strategies, but we all fall short on the execution. It's not a 1 day, a 1 month, or a 1 year activity. It's an ongoing.
Agreed.
So what did that look like?
Yeah. So you mentioned a couple of them, right? So, we approached it in multiple ways. Like you said, a lot of one-on-one conversations, a lot of group conversations as well too, right? So we would bring kind of the HR leaders or even like the business leaders, whatever you may call it, just our general stakeholders together to have this broad discussions, because the truth of the matter is everyone had questions. Some people had, more specific questions than others, but we would all learn from that, right? So bringing people together as a group to have these conversations was also very, very helpful, right? So, one-on-one group conversations, trainings, like specific trainings, right? Kind of, and by training, I mean things like, doing role plays, what to say, what not to say. We had to beef up our feedback and coaching training, right? Because we talk about feedback and coaching as if everyone just knows how to do it.
But it means that they're only doing these. If they're only doing it once a year, it's not really the sharpest tool that they have, is it? If they're doing it once,
that's exactly right.
Once a year, I have to have. I remember when I had to have the conversation with my team, I would actually go, oh, what questions did I ask again?
Yes.
What's the process that I have to do again? How do I fill this in and send it back? And because I only did it once a year. So it wasn't like it was like the best No one's going to be amazing at it because you do it once a year. So
Yes.
that way you had to do a lot more training then to get people.
Agreed. No, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct, right? And so there was a lot of flexing back up those muscles of feedback and coaching, because you're right. Instead of one set, now to be fair with you, some managers were better than others, obviously, but we just needed to make sure that we brought everyone up to at least the minimum level of the right coaching and feedback.
Yeah, it's consistent across all of
yeah.
it.
Exactly. Right. So there was a lot of training that went around, one-on-one. Like I said, we would role play. We would, have them read the right, different literature on feedback, on coaching. We had to kind of create new coaching training sessions, because we had an EA university team, if you will, and so we had to kind of deploy that globally across the organization.
Wow. So one of the things I get asked quite often as well is, when this happens, who's coaching the board members? Who's giving the feedback to the CEO, the CFO, the CMO? Just out of curiosity, do you use the same process, and is that something that HR does?
No, you are. Oh my God, Chris, you are so spot on with that question.
No one asked that question.
No, you're absolutely spot on. No, we actually had somebody as part of the working group, right, who was truly responsible for that. Because again, like I said, we broke down our stakeholder groups into different categories, and one of the stakeholders were the executive,
yeah,
CEO and his directs. And so we had somebody specifically dedicated to that group, right? Because the truth of the matter is, for change like this magnitude to happen in an organization,
they have to be on board.
Exactly. They have to be on board, but they also have to be showing the right behaviors, right? Yeah. Which will ultimately help the organization move forward in this new in this new way, in this new process. And so yeah, we had somebody specifically dedicated to that team.
Interesting. But on just out of curiosity, at the organization, who actually did have those conversations in terms of when you did the review, the annual or the quarterly review? Were they involved in that? Did they have their own quarterly review?
You mean the executives?
Yeah, the executives.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So the CEO,
who has that conversation? Is it the CEO having it
with his directs?
With his directs, with the CMO, the CFO,
yes.
the COO.
Yes.
So the CEO's leading that conversation. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this has to be a business-driven,
of course,
activity, right? So to your point, yes, the CEO is having those quarterly conversations with his directors.
Were they doing the annual one as well with the CEO?
Yes. Yeah. So in the previous world, right? CEO would do the annual reviews.
That seems even more crazy. That they're having that conversation. Surely they're not anyway, because they're in meetings every week. They're in meetings.
Exactly. You're totally right. Yeah.
It's almost like a waste of their time. And like we're already having these conversations every week, every day, every week, every month. Now I've got to do this formal yearly process, but in reality, by that point, they probably have had that chat about 100 times.
No, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct.
Very interesting. So looking back then, what would you have done differently? Anything you'd have done differently looking back that you wish you did? Or any lessons learned?
Oh my gosh, yes.
What are the main lessons learned then that you could share with our leaders that, what not to do, what not to do?
Yeah. So for me, some of the biggest lessons learned is, so this is going to be interesting, but we did not focus enough, attention on the HRBP population, frankly speaking, right? So that was one of our biggest.
Yeah.
Yes, we overlooked our own.
You didn't practice what you're preaching.
Yes, that's exactly right. So as part of this transformation, it was absolutely critical, right, to make sure that we brought our HRBP organization, our HR organization overall, into this process and get them fully bought in. And we just assumed that, everyone kind of understands what's going on here. Let's go ahead, let's go. It's going to be easy, right? It makes sense, right? But spending time with the HR organization and really helping them understand why we are doing this, getting their buy-in, that was something that, we had kind of overlooked in the beginning, right? And so we finally ended up paying a lot of attention to it. But the key lesson there is, do not forget to bring along the HR organization. Your
seems so obvious. It's so funny.
That's exactly right. It seems so absolutely obvious, but but it obviously really really wasn't.
I've heard that before as well, but quite a few transformations that fell short through the HR business partner themselves not being involved or on board, and Very
The other thing I would also say, frankly speaking, Chris, is do not forget to over communicate, right? So getting the message out there once doesn't help. It's got to be on a weekly basis. We had internal memos, we had weekly newsletters, we had everyone talking about it every time they got on stage. By everyone, I mean like all the leaders. Every time they had their own little town hall, so there was a marketing town hall.
Part of it, yeah.
Like they communicated all the time as well too. So and giving them the right talking points and so forth. That was all absolutely critical, right?
Yeah.
And so making sure that people had that information and making sure that we continuously reinforce the change that was taking place was absolutely critical.
Where was the what was the main the CRM that you used to bring this all together in terms of the technology platform? Was it like a Workday or
it was Workday. So we had. In
fact, I can guess that was Workday.
Yeah, no, exactly. Our HRIS platform was Workday. And,
okay.
And so we just continued to use Workday. But what we did do is we changed a couple functionalities within Workday, right? So for example, this whole feedback process thing, right? So typically speaking, we opened we called it at that point, give feedback functionality in Workday, again, once a year at the end of the year, right? But what we did now was we opened it and it was available all year long now. So that, whether you were working on a project and finished the project and wanted to get feedback, you would use that tool to kind of provide feedback. If you did something, well or worked on a specific activity that went well or did not go well, you could get your either manager, peers, colleagues, whatever it may be, to give feedback using that functionality in Workday, right? And so opening that up for all year round was something that helped because it allowed people to give feedback, all the time.
Yeah. So it wasn't a big change then in terms of recreating that in Workday. Then it wasn't wasn't a big barrier for you as well? No.
There was the barrier wasn't that great to be honest with you. I think what was a little bit challenging was, Workday had a field whereby, we could do kind of performance reviews on a yearly basis. The question now is how do we, ensure that the quarterly conversations that we're having, that those are documented somehow. Right.
So, I suppose that's the easy part, really.
Yes, exactly. No, that's true.
But then you just got to get everyone to use it, which is
that's the other thing.
Entering the right information and all that. Was it something that the managers themselves are doing, or was that going to HR and then HR was doing it, or was it
No, managers themselves. No. Yeah, this had to be driven by the managers and
themselves.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So looking back, then, what were some of the outcomes that you saw? Because for companies that are thinking about moving, away from the, it's a big conversation. It always comes up. I'm glad this is a good topic that we're talking about, because I'm here every day. And everyone keeps saying it, but a lot of companies still haven't made that shift. Most organizations actually haven't made that shift. And so what successes have come out of it, and what can you share as reasons why companies move over?
The first thing I want to share is that it is hard. It is not easy, right? To go from a structured process that you're used to, that everyone kind of understands, even though they hate, right? But they understand they're used to. It is not easy just to kind of move the entire organization into this new way of thinking, in this new way, in this new world. We had talked with companies such as I think Deloitte and some Adobe, some other companies who had actually kind of gone through the process already. And so we got some interesting kind of hindsight and feedback from them. So some of the successes, in my opinion, is we saw an improvement, and unfortunately, I'd actually, left within 6 or 7 months after we had implemented, actually. So now I'm kind of saying it from hearsay, or at least initial successes within those 6 months.
Sure.
Improvements in conversations, right? Improvements in the way people give feedback and the way people give coaching. There was a market mentality shift in the organization to ensure that people are getting the right level of coaching and feedback and the right conversations. And now the onus was not only on the manager and leader per se, but it was also on the employee, right? Part of our coaching, part of what we talked about as a change management in the organization is, employees, do not wait for your managers, supervisors, leaders, or whatever it may be, to initiate the coaching and feedback conversations, to initiate your development, right? It is on you.
Take charge of it.
Exactly. Take charge of it. Right. And so we saw more employees doing that also, which was great.
You empowered them to, and you encouraged them to, for once.
That's exactly right. The ball is in their court.
Yes. At the end of the year, we'll get to it. Yeah.
Yes,
And
yes,
it
yes.
changes by then, right? And it changes all the time, right? Your needs don't change probably multiple times throughout a year,
That's
not
exactly right.
once a year. And even what I'm like, sometimes I look at the development plans that I created for my team, then I look at the end of the year, it's like completely,
It's completely different.
and the needs of the business changed.
Yes.
The needs of my team and, you know, the projects we're working on changed, you know, a few months after us setting this plan. And
that was the key thing. I mean, you bring up a really great point, Chris, and I can't believe I forgot to mention this, but one of the biggest changes that we had in part of this process is goal setting, right? And because exactly what you just said, in the previous world, we would set goals, exactly, which
it's crazy.
The thought of a yearly goal is absolutely absurd.
I can't even think about it. Yeah.
Yes.
I operate in our office. We have day, week, basically I have it broken down by day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then and I even do it morning and afternoon. In a lot of cases.
Honestly.
Year goals. I'm not even thinking it's there. We have a year goal, but on a day-to-day basis, I'm not thinking about it's the sum of the daily, weekly, monthly goals that add up to my yearly goal.
Perfect. Right. And so we empowered people to say, hey, yes, let's set goals that make sense for your organizations. If it's, you know, weekly for you, fantastic. If it's monthly for you, excellent. If it's quarterly, but you know, the process of setting goals changed and the way we set goals changed as well too. So that was another big plus for us is we were starting to have more realistic conversations about goals and not waiting for the end to change them, update them or whatever it may be.
Yeah. I think as well, when you talk about innovation, I think this is going to have a big impact in the future of companies that move to this just on innovation because the speed of information being transferred. Because if you're only speaking to your line manager, you know, once a year and having a detailed conversation, all the great ideas and that exist in our employees that are working with our customers on the bottom floor never really get any attention. Whereas if you're having those consistent, I used to have team meetings every week with my team and daily morning meeting, and some of the most amazing ideas that we had through one-on-ones, you know, and getting the feedback and having those conversations transformed our business and our products and what we were trying to achieve because we had that constant feedback loop.
Exactly.
We can solve problems quickly.
Exactly.
You know,
it's much more agile.
Yeah, it's just it seems as a startup that's all we do. You know, where companies take a whole year to shift, we can change in one day because we can get everyone together, have a chat, and execute tomorrow, right?
That's exactly right.
Every organization, that's something that the link between innovation and, you know, the moving away from the annual. You wouldn't think that, oh, Chris, how can annual performance review impact our innovation? I think it really will. It's just my random thought in my head.
I don't think it's a random thought at all. I honestly don't think it's a random thought at all. I mean, honestly, it does help. It helps innovation. It helps, being a much more agile environment. It helps them be more dynamic. Which, by the way, is the business environment and context that we live in today. Yes, right. So
you have to.
You can't tell me that in the business you set one goal for the year and that's it. No, I mean you have to adapt and change. Right, with the environment, with the business context, with whatever is going on, right? And so that needs to happen internally as well too.
Fantastic. Well, I'm glad I asked you that question now.
I know, exactly.
Well, look, that leads us quite nicely onto our quickfire round.
Yes.
Where I'm going to ask you 5 questions and you have no longer than 30 seconds to give us some amazing answers.
Wow, all right. Let's give it a shot.
What was the number one thing that was holding you back from becoming a senior HR leader?
I would say it was confidence, right? It was, for some reason, there was a part of my life where I didn't feel like I had the confidence to be able to go toe to toe, with the business leaders, with the HR leaders, or whatever it may be. But once that switched, once I felt much better about the fact that, hey, you know what, I know what I'm doing, and it's perfectly fine, right? I think that helped me. That helped me in every aspect of my role, every aspect of my job, and how I showed up, how I presented myself, and so forth. So building confidence, and confidence for me came with experience, right? So the ability to try different roles and experience different things, that helped me out quite a bit.
You try it, you'll build the confidence.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
It's funny. About 80% of the people I speak to answered the question with that same response, and it's important.
Oh, really?
It's important for people to hear that. It's the same reason for me. It's that most of the time we're holding back ourselves.
Yes, you are exactly right. Yep.
Almost 90% of the time, it's actually our fears, our doubts, and our self-belief is actually what gets in the way of our progression. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. What's the best piece of business advice that you've received?
The best piece of business advice is immerse yourself. Honestly speaking, immerse yourself in the business, right? So, as an HR professional and leader, right? You forget that you are actually part of the business, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of align yourself to the HR organization way too much, right?
You forget that you'll be forgotten.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. So, business advice is, immerse yourself, roll up your sleeves, and get into pick up projects that are not HR related as part of the business, right? So if, initiatives are going around and they're looking for somebody to kind of start work groups or whatever it may be to tackle a specific business problem, get in there, right? Get in there and be involved with your business leaders so that you're not, quote unquote, the HR guy.
Fantastic. The HR guy, yeah.
Yeah.
No one wants to be that. That still goes around as a terminology. Oh, the HR guy, yeah.
Yes, exactly. No. You want to avoid that title like the plague.
Yeah, be that guy. What's some books that you'd recommend to our listeners and why?
Ooh, I love Freakonomics. That's probably still today one of my favorite books, right? And the reason I love that is because, Freakonomics and actually Tipping Point as well, too. So often we forget that data plays a huge part of our world, right? Trust me, the business doesn't forget this because they are immersed and work with data day in and day out, right? That's how they kind of drive decisions. I think in the HR world, a lot of times we kind of forget that, right? And so, one of the things about those two books, actually, again, Freakonomics and Tipping Point, what they taught me was, wow, if you look at history, if you look at data, it is some of the greatest ways to kind of make decisions in the HR world.
Great. Definitely two great books. No one's mentioned Freakonomics, but they've mentioned Tipping Point, so I'll link this up in the description for everyone.
Yes.
Could you share some internet resources that you use to learn, stay productive, stay up to date with current events? When you're going on your Google Chrome every day, what's on your desktop? What are you looking at?
This is going to sound very, very lame and, very kind of mainstream, but it's usually, so first and foremost, just to kind of give you props, Chris, podcasts are my big thing now, right? So, I will, jump on and listen to things such as The Daily, actually BBC News, and different types of podcasts. Kara Swisher has an amazing one in Silicon Valley called Recode Decode, which is fantastic. So, podcast is actually my number one go-to right now for just kind of learning.
Why is that?
It's just easier for me to access them, right? So, for example, when I'm in the gym, right? So this morning I went running, right? It was super easy for me to just kind of put on a podcast and run with the podcast and kind of just listen to that as I'm working out, right? Yeah. So again, my go-to thing is usually podcasts. But if I were, to your point, if I went on Google, my usual go-to stuff are the traditional papers, right? So kind of, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, CNN's actually, and stuff like that. Outside of that, I will do a lot of HBR, so Harvard Business Reviews.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they've got Harvard Business Review has some really cool articles on talent and people agendas and organizational views and stuff like that as well too. So I give them quite a bit of kudos on a lot of their articles. What else do I do?
Where do you spend time social media wise?
LinkedIn. Actually, this sounds ridiculous, well, because my girlfriend makes fun of me all the time. But LinkedIn, I spend quite a bit of time there from a social media standpoint.
How we met.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, that is true. It's how we met. So LinkedIn, because there's some really good articles.
Do you still use Twitter? And because I think it's kind of dying out now, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't use Twitter at all. Actually, I use Instagram quite a bit. I love to travel, right? And so when I do travel, I'll post on Instagram.
Have you ever found any HR content on Instagram? No. Purely just my personal perspective.
Not really. Yeah,
I'm battling with that in my head whether I want to start posting 1 minute clips from our show on Instagram, but I don't know if it's worthwhile.
It's worth trying it, honestly, because I'm on it quite a bit, right? So
I'm just like, people on it. It's not a case of are people on it. It's just will they want to consume a 1 minute clip from their peers. So
yeah, that's a good point.
So I made that a lot longer than 30 seconds. So it's my fault.
No worries. Sorry about that.
What's the one thing about your business that most excites you today?
How ever changing it is. So, work for Visa. It's a payments company. It's a technology payments platform. And the thing that excites me the most about our business is how relevant it is. Everyone pays around the world somehow, some way, somehow, right? So you've got to get some good and you've got to pay for it somehow. But the most exciting piece for it is the way you pay in China. It's very different from the way you pay in the UK, very different from the way you pay in Ghana, right? Very different from the way you pay here in the US, right? One would argue in the UK, you're a lot more advanced than the US is because most of your payment methodology is by what we call pay wave, right? So you don't have to kind of swipe the card.
No, just
right?
tap it,
Tap it.
or a thumb. Like I pay most things now on just holding my Apple Pay.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
You honestly, if you came to the US, you would probably be laughing at us because we are still.
Really? I thought you guys are all over that. No.
Oh God, no. From a
so you can't go every single shop in the UK. You can go in, just tap your card, tap it, walk out. Or you don't have that in the US, no?
We do.
But
It's not as penetrated. Exactly. It's not as penetrated as
everywhere. Yeah.
Exactly. In the UK, it's everywhere. Right. Whereas if you go to China, a lot of it is QR codes now, right? And so they'll use
QR
that
code.
Yes.
They pay with QR codes.
They pay with everything is QR codes.
I'll scan it and it gives them the price and then it pays.
Then it just pays it. Yeah. And the technology is amazing, right? So it's a very dynamic industry. It's extremely innovative. It's fast paced. And it's just awesome, right? So that's what it is about the business that super excites me right now. It's fun.
Fantastic. Well, I can definitely feel the enthusiasm. Well, Sam, you've been an amazing guest. So I really appreciate you taking the time out to share your knowledge and experience for our listeners. So I know they'll be a lot better off for it. So thank you very much.
That's great. I appreciate that.
Before we part ways,
yes,
one piece of parting guidance for all of the HR leaders out there listening to the show, and also the best way to get in touch with you if our leaders have any or our listeners have any questions.
Yeah, thank you. So the best way to get in touch with me is honestly, like I said before, LinkedIn, right? Feel free to kind of reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's Samuel K. Tam is the best way to find me. Or feel free to email me as well too, right? I am at sktam7@gmail.com. So, feel free to get a hold of me that way also. Parting advice. Wow, that's tough, Chris. You're putting me on the spot here.
One piece of advice.
I know, exactly. Okay, for me, it would be, obviously kind of, depends on your level and so forth, but build the best team to help support you if you have that opportunity. So if you actually have a team, right, like focus and invest on bringing the right people around you, right, to help deliver and drive your objectives, your goals, and so forth, right? Even if you are not able to kind of build a team, it's having the right people around you, right? Whether it's your business leader, whether it's HR professionals, whatever it may be, it is, make sure that you are, partnering with the right people, make sure that you are leveraging the right people, continue learning, through those people, and really leverage on the right folks to help you deliver. Like, you're not in this world alone. You cannot achieve everything alone. Make sure you kind of, partner with people to get things done.
Fantastic. It's actually a hard thing for people to delegate.
It really is. And by the way,
and I'll share something. Go on. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I was going to say that has been one of my development opportunities as I've kind of grown up in the HR world, and so this is why I actually brought this up. But delegating has always been a really challenging thing for me.
I'll give you a perfect example for this, and then I'll wrap up. I had a workshop with 30 chief HR officers a few months ago, and one of our presenters said to everyone in the room, "Put your hand up if you've ever had any formal training around delegation."
Yeah.
2 people put their hands up.
Yeah.
So we're putting HR directors, not even just HR directors, we're putting managers, leaders in positions of responsibility and managing roles, managing people. And almost 90% of them have never, ever had any training, formal delegation training.
Absolutely.
And we wonder why they fail.
Exactly. And it sounds so simple, right? Chris, delegate it. Just give your, no, it's actually very hard
I struggle with it too.
Right way.
I'm like, if my new rule now is if they can do it 70% of what I had to the ability I can, then it's fine.
Yeah, that's excellent. I love that.
Because no one's ever gonna. You're never gonna be happy with how someone does it the way you would, because it's just the way it doesn't exist. So yeah, I'm glad, thank you for sharing that. Guys, head over to hrleaders.com. There you'll find all of the show notes from the episode, everything we're discussing, all of the links, everything that's mentioned. Sam, thank you again for taking the time to join us, and I'll let you get on with your day. Speak
That
to you
sounds
soon.
great. Thanks for having me on, Chris. You've been a great host. I appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll stay in touch.
Fantastic.